All right, in this short visuals video, we're going to take a look at the Allied leaders. And like I said, just kind of keeping these in short chunks. So there's just going to be 3 here, so that it's a little easier to go back and review if you need that. Also, you're going to see these guys show up in a lot of different things we're doing. And so these are just some brief explanations, hopefully for you to connect with as you're seeing some of the other presentations. And if you're interested in these guys, you can go out and do some additional research yourself. One of my favorite people from World War II is this fellow. His name is Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister of Great Britain for the most part in World War II. He's not the Prime Minister at the beginning. There's a man named Neville Chamberlain. You may remember him from talking about appeasement. But Winston Churchill will take over as the war gets started. Winston Churchill had had a lot of different jobs in the British government, and so he was well qualified for the post of Prime Minister. Prime Minister is kind of like our president. There are some differences, but for our intents and purposes, he is the main leader of Britain during World War II. As World War II gets started, he finds himself very quickly, once France has fallen, standing alone against the Nazis in Europe. And really, he figures out pretty quickly that his job is to keep Britain going until he can convince Franklin Roosevelt and the Americans to join in to World War II. So one of the things he's got to do is he's got to boost morale in Britain. What was great about Winston Churchill is he was an extremely talented orator. He says some things, and we've already seen some in that early wars video, some speeches that are still, still remembered today. Some of the things that he was able to say. You may want to think of him as kind of a locker room coach. The guy that's going to give the speeches, keep people fired up no matter how desperate things are going to start to look. Winston Churchill, before and after his time as Prime Minister, will be an accomplished author. He was a Navy man. He had served in the British military. Just all kinds of really neat stuff. Like I said, he's a really cool guy, I think, from not just World War II, but from world history. He was not afraid to call a spade a spade. He called Hitler and the Nazis out for the thugs that they were, really from the very beginning of World War II. When he convinces the United States to join his side after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he then kind of works hand in hand with Franklin Roosevelt and eventually Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, to bring about a swift end to Nazism. He and Joseph Stalin, who we'll see in a second, were not BFFs by any imagination. Churchill had actually, after World War I, tried to help his government overthrow the communists who were trying to take over what was then Russia. And so there was quite a bit of distrust between the two men. Amazingly, once World War II is over with in Europe, Churchill's government, his party in government, is voted out of power, which means Winston Churchill no longer gets to be the Prime Minister. It doesn't work out very well for Britain, and they actually bring back Winston Churchill in the 1950s, and so he ends up coming back. I happen to think that all babies look an astounding amount like Winston Churchill when they're born. So take a look at this picture and then try and forget that the next time you're seeing a baby. Our leader during World War II is going to be Franklin Roosevelt for the most part. We'll see right at the very end of the war, his vice president will have to take over because Franklin Roosevelt's going to die in office actually before the surrender of Nazi Germany, just a couple of weeks before. But Franklin Roosevelt's the only U.S. president elected more than twice. He was elected 4 times to the role. Probably should have laid down power after that third election. It wasn't very healthy, but he wanted to try and see the war through to the end. He has 4 different vice presidents. He'll actually pick a different one to run with every time. But Franklin Roosevelt, here is seen giving a fireside chat. We already talked quite a bit about this guy. He's our first president that was in a wheelchair. And he also relied on his skills with oratory to keep people going during this difficult time. He also had to manage, as far as the Allies go, different personalities. He's got Stalin on his side, but he's also got Churchill. He liked both men and kind of had to be a go-between between both men as he was filling that role. But he's got to, at least in the beginning, to convince the United States not only to help Britain, but then once Pearl Harbor starts, to get directly involved in the war. He'd been president during the Great Depression. By the time the Great Depression's over, he kind of sees the handwriting on the wall and decides to go for a 3rd term, breaking the tradition of George Washington. In the 1950s, late 40s, early 50s, they will pass a constitutional amendment that says no one can have more than 2 terms as President of the United States. So, barring some kind of amendment to the Constitution, nobody will beat Franklin Roosevelt's record of 12 and a half years as being President of the United States. The last guy we see is the guy on the left in this picture. His name is Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin is the leader of the Soviet Union during World War II. Joseph Stalin, in history, if you just look at the kind of amount of cruelty, the number of deaths of innocent people that happened under his rule, would be right up there with a character in history like Adolf Hitler. He doesn't get quite the same reputation because he's on our side during World War II. But if you remember back, he had actually signed a non-aggression pact with Adolf Hitler, and they had agreed to split Poland at the beginning of the war. It's not until Hitler will betray Joseph Stalin that he ends up joining the Allies. But by most accounts, Stalin was a very cruel leader. Estimates put it as he was responsible for the deaths of 12 million of his own civilians during the time that he will be the leader. He takes over for Vladimir Lenin. If you remember our 20s visuals, the guy that brought communism to the Soviet Union, and the rumor circulated that he had actually poisoned Lenin to get that job. He was fairly ruthless. When Nazis break the Nazi-Soviet pact and attack the Soviet Union, he's so ashamed that he'd gotten taken advantage of that he goes into hiding for a bit, does come back out as the Nazis surround Moscow, and he refuses to leave Moscow. He basically tells his troops, if you let these guys into Moscow, they're going to take me. By most accounts, it worked. His men fight, hold him off. That in the Russian winter will stop the German advance, and then Stalin will start to push the Nazis back, racing towards Berlin. This is really an instance of kind of that old adage that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Neither of the other guys really trusted Joseph Stalin, and as the war starts to come to a close, he starts to grab territory. They actually don't declare war on Japan until right at the end of the war in order to see some islands off of the east coast of the Soviet Union. And so he is not exactly looked at as super trustworthy by the guys that he's going to be serving with. But because of the threat of Nazi Germany, he was definitely an ally that our guys were glad to have.